All right, did that fix it? All right. Check, check, mic check.
Yeah, I could hear you the whole time, but
Now I got you. I was having trouble.
okay. See,
Thanks for hanging in there.
no problem.
All right. So only two left. That'll be good. Then I could do something else. Probably go over all the footage. Today's lecture, making friends from enemies, or turning enemies into friends. There's a reason this lecture is the second to last lecture. And there's definitely a reason that it comes after the chapter on forgiveness of the self. Because making friends into enemies requires you to forgive someone who does not care about you. You have to forgive them for being themselves. You have to try to understand them well enough to figure out why they are your enemy when they have no intention of cooperating with you or fixing the situation on their own. So that's the scale of the topic at hand, and that's kind of a bit of a defense for the order that these come in. Well, let's start this lecture the same way we start all the lectures, with the definitions and the title. How to turn your enemies into friends. Well, how to, we know what that means, because this whole lecture series is a big one big how to. How to think like I do. So that's the best definition for it. How do I think it works? That's my thing. So I get to tell you how it works. You could say there's other ways to make it work. You could say that you can't make it work the way that I can. That might be true. But as far as a how-to goes, how-to applies to anybody who has how done. And I've how done this a bunch of times. So here's how-to. All right. Turn your enemies into friends. Well, let's talk about turn. All right. So when I say turn, I mean help convince. I did not say steer. I did not say punch. I did not say beat, suplex, backdrop, verbally lambast, shame, gaslighting. That's not it. Turn, okay? You know the best way to get a turn to happen? A turn signal. So this is a encouragement of all of the signals that will tell your enemy that it is better to be your friend and that they should make that choice on their own. So that's what I mean by the word turn. Let's go enemies. All right, just going down the list now. Enemies, people who are against you, people who wish you would fail, people who don't care what you're trying to do so long as you do not get what you want. These people are your enemies. People who are actively seeking to make you fail. It's not enough that they leave you alone to die. They have to make sure that you suffer. Those are your enemies. Into friends. So into, well, that's easy. There's a little transformation going on there, which really is a different way of saying enemies into friends. If you look at that phrase on its own, there's a different concept that we've used quite a bit in this lecture series to explain that. Everything has an opposite. All right. Love and hate. Get it right. Enemies and friends. All right. Those are two opposite ends of a single spectrum. And when I say you have two opposite ends of a thing, that means you can talk about that one concept as a single thing and put your progress somewhere along those two extremes. So enemies into friends, that is meant to say that this is not an either or proposition. They are not either your friend or your enemy. It's not a 1 or a 0. You can't say that unless you know 100% about a person. You can say everything you know about that person makes them your friend or your enemy. But until you know everything there is to know about that person, you really don't know what percentage of that being wishes that you would fail, because some of you might agree on some things. even though you hate each other. So they're not 100% an enemy unless they oppose you at 100% of the things. So you can start taking a list, right? Like if you get to somebody who really is just down to the level of stabbing puppies, you know, and they think it's fun, or they're demented, or they just wish violence, or they get pleasure from going out and causing as much suffering as possible. Well, that person, you can be their enemy. Like, come on, man. Forgiveness is not a virtue if it's not optional. It's just something to do. It's not a virtue if you have no choice. There's no responsibility when there's no choice. Which means it's kind of on you to make that decision. And the only way you can make that decision is if you're willing to judge a human being. Which means you need to be willing to judge yourself. Because that's how it works. It's judge not lest ye be judged. That's not meaning I don't ever want to use judgment because I don't want to be judged. Well, that's stupid. That only applies if you're the only one who can judge things. Everyone else is going to judge you already. So there's that. So you can't really hide behind to say you can't judge me. Like, of course I can. I can say you're a coward when it comes to judgment. What are you going to do? You can't judge me back. You don't believe in it. I don't worship your God of non-judgment. You do. You deal with the problems caused by a lack of judgment. What's worse, bad judgment or no judgment? Good judgment is the best. But the fact that there's 3 different options means that there's a way to get it right. So, enemies into friends. You want someone to stop working against you because enough of what you agree on, both agree, it's good if those things happen. We don't have to like each other, but we both want this sort of benefit. So why don't we just focus our efforts there? And then, okay, maybe it is a good idea if your life doesn't implode because you are actually doing a good job on this thing that I also care about. Oh, you also like to barbecue out in the backyard. Well, I guess I do too. Oh, you don't like that kind of beer. I guess, wow, maybe we have more in common than I thought. You got to start somewhere. Point. And if you always start where everybody is your enemy, then you should get very good at turning enemies into friends. Because if you don't, all you are going to have is enemies, and you will be your own worst enemy. And because you have no way of dealing with them, you will have no way of dealing with yourself. Just because you're the enemy doesn't mean you know how to stop you. Maybe stopping enemies isn't in your skill set. So you're going to let you walk all over you? You big soft bastard. Not even a choice. Go and get me another beer. No, I'm not going to thank you for it because you believe you owe it to me. Why would I give you more credit than you give yourself? Just as an example of how silly, but how real some of these households behave. There are houses out there where that is normal. Someone doesn't value themselves. Another person doesn't value them either. Nobody's changing that. Who's the enemy? No. In that case, nobody. Because they're both in on it. So that's the other thing, is turning enemies into friends. Well, that makes you complicit for having enemies. Another responsibility, which is a reason people don't do this. But guess what? You get more enemies doing it that way. So if your goal is to be right and not judge anybody, you will have so many more enemies than if you just show some damn good judgment once in a while about what is a friend and an enemy. It's not a hard decision to make. You just got to pay attention to what people are doing to you, which is the definition I gave of an enemy back at the beginning. They're actively working against you, either for their benefit or just because your failure sustains them. Those are both reasons people make other people suffer. All right. So that covers the title. The goal is to take somebody who's working against you and to show that maybe it would be better if you didn't hate each other. All right. So how do you do that? Well, there's a lot of ways. That's the problem. There's a lot of ways because there's a lot of people. And the same way isn't going to work for the same person every time. So the first thing you need to get out of your head is that you're going to be able to learn one thing to fix this problem that you've caused a million different ways. Thinking you can fix a problem the same way is what got you into this mess. You know? You can't fuck yourself so hard that you get in and out of trouble. You don't go all the way through, you just keep going down. So at one point, you got to say the same thing isn't working. The same thing still isn't working. Okay, now the same thing still isn't working, and my brain must not be working because I believe if I try hard enough, cause and effect are going to somehow rewrite themselves. I'll keep trying. It's a popular choice. People spend decades in there. Be one of them, or not. I was stuck in a loop for quite a while. Sucked. Everybody sucked. It was their fault. Why couldn't they give me a break? Why is everyone being so hard on me? That sort of stuff. It's a miserable experience. It's a blaming experience. So, turning enemies into friends. Why? Well, let's start with the most selfish reason and work our way back. The most selfish reason is you're less likely to die if you have less enemies. Straight survival. You want to live. You want to prosper. You want to have your next meal taken care of. You want to know that you're not going to come home and your house isn't going to be on fire. Or if you've got some really bad enemies, maybe they'll come inside and put you down. If you're involved in some really nasty stuff, maybe you got a friend in a gang. Maybe he tells you to do things for him. Maybe you're afraid to say no because you don't want to make any enemies. All of a sudden, your house is the one that gets shot up in the next drive-by. Or maybe you're at work and you're trying to do your best job and be honest and show up on time, and somebody gets pissed off because they got blamed for something they did. Maybe you were a part of it. Well, now they're going out of their way to make you look bad, which fucks with your income. Even if you don't get fired, you could get knocked out of the running for a promotion and never know it happened or why. Enemies do not need to face you to hurt you. So having them is a big deal. If you make an enemy, you want it to be somebody who will get no support from anybody. You need your enemies to be without moral defense. That is your defense against enemies. Everybody else agrees that person is the asshole. That is the single greatest deterrent for having enemies that there is. I'll teach you how to build it. So there might be other ways. I'm not going to say there aren't. Some of those ways have different pros and consequences. All right. You could destroy your enemies. Maybe you're just a terrible badass. Or maybe you cut everybody down with your words. Or both. Or maybe you're really big and it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong because you could just muscle someone around. Or maybe you've got a lot of money and you pay a bunch of really big dudes a lot of money to muscle everyone around so you don't have to be nice. So you have enemies, but who cares? They can't touch you. Maybe you can afford that. It's wasteful. takes a lot of resources to counteract a living being that could choose to do things in real time by reacting to situations that are so complex they could never be predicted entirely. Human beings are unpredictable, which means it's expensive to make them predictable. But maybe you got a lot of money and you don't care. Well, go down that road as far as you want. I'm not, this lecture isn't about that person. I'm sure there's a handbook out there. I'm sure there's a company out there that if you can write a check big enough, they will make your problem go away. So if you have that money and that attitude and those resources, you don't need me. Unless you're trying to save money. That way it's a lot cheaper. There's limitations though, so you might save money but lose the opportunity for exploitation further down the line. Depends what kind of business you're running at that point. I've got nothing to do with it. This is only works for ethically minded people. And I say that not because I did that on purpose and not because I'm judging. That's the only way I found that it works. It defeats itself if it's not done from a very specific perspective of wanting to care about another human being. Which is why I don't care if the wrong people hear this, because they'll be incapable of using it. So, but yeah, you can defeat your enemies by force. Live by the sword, die by the sword. That doesn't mean that you're going to get, your comeuppance right away. But it does mean that whatever you do to someone else in the name of them being your enemy becomes fair game to do to you by your own admission. Or you're a hypocrite and a coward. It's okay if I slash his tires. He's a punk. Oh, how dare he slash my tires? You're both punks. Stop it. Like, he's a punk for doing it, and you're the punk for expecting it to be different for you. Different kind of punk. It's not good. None of these are flattering. Your standards for how you treat your enemies are not a one-on-one interaction. They are one-on-one interactions between you and that person. But you are not the only person who witnesses that interaction. You're not the only person who's affected by that interaction. You're probably not the only person that you talk to about that interaction. Everybody knows if you got enemies. You can't shut up about them because they piss you off. You got to tell somebody who's going to say that you're right, not them. Okay. But the point is, when you have enemies, you also hurt your friends. Unless your friends don't care about you and your enemies are weak. That's how you can get out of it. If your friends don't care about you and your enemies are too weak to really hurt you, nobody's going to care what they do to you. Or if your friends really don't care, they won't care about your enemies that way, unless your enemies go and attack them to get to you. That's not as likely. But if you have friends that care about you, then they are going to care when you suffer. And people without enemies suffer less than people who have them, because everybody suffers life. We suffer at different amounts, sure, but everybody knows what it's like to get hit, at least at some point. Everybody falls over. Everybody stubs their toe at least once. Some of us get it way more than others, but everybody gets it at least once. There's not a man alive who has not experienced a shot to the testicles. Doesn't happen. We all get there at some point. But enemies will try to put you there. Fuck with you in ways you don't understand until something in front of you shouldn't be there. It's statistically illogical. You would have had no reason to expect it. The only thing that makes sense is a fucking Bugs Bunny a Daffy Duck cartoon where you have a legitimate guy that you pissed off working in the shadows, setting up an Acme product so that you will run into it and screw up your life. A fucking cartoon. Having enemies. So that's why, from a selfish perspective, you shouldn't want enemies. It's a survival perspective. Even if you don't care about the person, there's a reason to go through the motions, a strategic one. Now, let's say that you're not a heartless, strategic bastard, and you also would like it if people were kinder. Oh no, what are we doing? We're getting so far away from what feels good, which is to hate these men and women who work against us. What do you mean we have to view them as people? No. There's a reason for that. Everything is a reflection, whether you think it is or not. Because your brain has all of the information that you've ever encountered. And you can copy information from outside sources. You can listen to things. You can react and explore. But everything that you are is inside you in a specific moment. Which means you have a list of what is and isn't okay to do based on how you feel about somebody. Show me the person that hasn't hated themselves for at least a moment. And ask, is the judgment being used the same? Do you get a pass where your enemies do not? Do you know the right way to do a thing that bothers you when other people do it? How quick are you to forgive yourself for the same transgression that someone else does to you? How patient are you with yourself when you're slow, or when you make a mistake, or when you jump the gun, or when you assume something of someone else? Do you judge yourself with the same level of patience that you give other people? That's the reason it's important to understand this. Because if you do not, you have a bigger problem than having enemies. You think you're better than people because you give yourself better treatment. So either you love yourself too much or you love them not enough. But the problem is the way they act is a reflection of you, which means you will not have an accurate view of yourself until you can look at another person and say, what would it take for me to hate myself the way that this person does? What did they experience? Why do they feel that way? What don't they know about me? What have I shown them? Maybe you've had 4 interactions with this person. They don't know you. They know that the 4 times they've interacted with you, you were suspicious, accusatory, dismissive, and an asshole. I would be your enemy too. Now, if you kept that up for long enough, first I'd try to see which one of us was worse. For scientific reasons, of course. I just want to map their limitation of how much they can tread that line before they start to get a little pissed. I turn back. I just want to know where the line is. I don't need to cross it. Everybody barks at the line. You know, you can get to the line as long as you don't cross it. You bark and then back off. It's fine. But the point is, if your interactions with a person are limited and you assume that they should give you the benefit of a lifetime of observation just because you've had it, you are not judging them by your standard because you're looking at them to do a thing you're not doing for them, which is only fair if you admit to them up front that you're incapable of it. So if that's a problem, and you can admit it, you do not suffer from the bias of I am better than you. If those words cannot leave your mouth, that is because they are incompatible with holding that position. That's the test. They will catch in your throat until you believe it. So that's why. Because if you have too many enemies, if it is easy for people to be your enemy, you have a problem with self-measurement to the point of constant bias. Your view of reality is skewed completely. And what goes around comes around, which means you are sending things in a direction that is different from where you think they are supposed to go. You are feeding it, it comes back to you, and you don't understand why it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop because you have a bad internal measurement, and that's how you find it. How many enemies do you have? If it's a lot, go back, look at self-measurement, look at how to separate yourself, how to understand your emotions. There's 12 hours on fallacy and bias. Learn them. Learn about the ego. Do shadow boxing. You're not ready for turning enemies into friends yet. You are still your enemy. The rest of this course is how to fix that. This chapter is not for you if you are still your own enemy. You are not trained enough. You will hurt yourself and others. These aren't toys, these ideas. They have consequences. You are trying to make a choice in your life that is different from a choice you have been making. It matters. Treat it like it matters, and it will behave like it matters. Treat it like it doesn't matter, and your life will not change because you don't think your life matters enough to change it. You only think it matters enough to let it happen, which means it doesn't matter enough for you to take ownership of it. It's another reason why this matters, or at least it could. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe your life not mattering is a good thing for the rest of us. Ever think about that? Maybe the fact that you don't care is doing us a favor. Does that motivate you? You can't hide behind it anymore, at least. I don't know. I don't know how many tens of people I was speaking to just then. Probably one. One person maybe needed to hear that. If that person wasn't you, don't worry about it. I wasn't talking to you. The person who needed to hear that is the person who thanks me for saying it. Everyone else needs to hear something else. All right, so how do you do it? Well, step one is you need to understand what's in front of you. And you need to understand how that's different from what's normally in front of you. What is in front of you is another human being who's led a life that is probably as complicated as yours. That isn't to say that you've had the same life. Using the scientific definition of complexity, meaning the decision to go left or to go right when you step out of bed impacts your entire existence in ways you don't understand. You are the product of choices. How old you are, how many choices you've taken, that determines the complexity of your life. So a person can have a very simple life full of suffering, and another person can have a very complex life that is fulfilling, and vice versa. So don't confuse a competition for suffering. And if you are confusing that, get that weak shit out of this lecture. Go back to the shadow boxing chapters. That idea has no place here. It's too simple. It's something to deal with before you deal with this. So you have to look at this person like they're a human being that is your equal. So if you can't do that, don't bother trying. Moving on. This person believes things like every person believes, all right? What do they believe that makes them hate you? Can you list it? Here's the test to tell if you're treating this person as your equal. Are you making judgments about what they must believe? Or are you quoting what they have told you they believe? If you are not using words they would agree with when you summarize their position, you do not know them. You know yourself and what you would do if you said that, which means you would fail terribly trying to use the idea they seem to understand better than you. That's not to say that they don't have a better or worse idea. That is to say, if you cannot restate their own position in words they agree have not misrepresented them, you are lying to yourself about what they are. And you have to ask why. What's so bad about understanding that person the way they understand themselves? That's the first step to turning enemies into friends, is you have to keep checking that you are not your own enemy first. All right, so let's say you're not your own enemy and you actually can have a conversation with somebody who doesn't like you. What can you expect? Well, you can expect them to behave like that person doesn't like you. But you're going to get surprised if they're taking jabs at you. This isn't turning friends into enemies, which is just take jabs at them for no reason. Keep that up long enough, you'll make your friends into enemies, which is a thing to pay attention to if you take jabs at everybody. You're your own worst enemy if you do that. So you get to understand this person using words they understand and agree with. Here's what to expect. They will answer your questions so long as you do not insult them. They will answer your questions so long as you keep them simple. They will answer your questions as long as they are questions, which means they don't assume things. They don't assume you must believe. They don't assume anything. They don't assume you're bad. They don't assume you're good. They are actual questions where you don't know the answer ahead of time. So you have to ask questions that do not rely on your assumptions about reality. If you cannot ask them what their assumptions about reality are, you are suffering from I is greater than you. I am only willing to understand you in words I use. That is the opposite of this chapter. You are the enemy. You need to learn how to do this for yourself first, then learn how to do it to others. So that's the second test. You're going to get tested through this whole thing. Enemies into friends is hard. If it was easy, nobody would have any enemies. So that's the second hurdle. Am I willing to accept your premise without changing it because it is different from my own? If you can't, then you can't understand this person. If you can't tell the difference between understanding and agreement, you have bigger problems. Understanding and agreement are different things. If you have a problem separating them, this lecture is too hard for you. You are not ready for it. Do not try. You will fail. Because the difference between understanding and agreement, to quote Mark Twain, is as different as the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. Just because they sound similar, just because they have similar thoughts, doesn't make them interchangeable. There's a separation for a reason. That separation exists and is very critical to this process. You have to decide, which is why many people don't. Why decide a thing when you don't have to do anything? People love not being responsible for shit. You just try it. You don't believe me? Try to make somebody responsible for the tiniest thing that they don't want to be responsible for. The smaller, the better. Force that on them. See what happens. Watch how petty they get. Watch how petty you're being. It always happens in pairs, by the way. So that's the other thing. So that's the second part. Know what to expect. Here's the third part. There's many parts. They are not going to be cooperative. Don't expect them to be cooperative. Which means there is a difference between pacifism and placation and turning enemies into friends. They are your enemy. They want to destroy you. That's what enemies do. The more you give up, the better for them. They need to know that it's bad for them to be your enemy, and they don't want that either. You don't get to decide that for both of you. You can only suggest it and make it sound like a good idea, which is the tying back to the first part of the chapter. Turning. This is not a control thing. You are responsible for a negotiation. So how do you start? Well, here's a good one. I gave you a bunch of reasons why it's selfish to not want enemies. Those are pretty good openers for a negotiation. Hey, it sucks having to look out for you all the time. It would be nice if we weren't hurting each other all the time. Maybe we don't have to live in a world where each of us is going out of our way to do this. I think both of our lives would be better if we could figure that out. I don't like you very much, but I don't like the way my life is either. So maybe both of us could do some things that we both agree is a good idea. We don't have to like each other to recognize that they're both good decisions for us. That's how you start. Depending on how much of an ass you've been, or depending on how much of an ass they are, or most likely, depending on how much of an ass you've been to each other, there will be distrust at the beginning. Expect it. What are you going to do? Give up after 1 inch? Do you expect a magic bullet, Mr. Kennedy? That's not how it works. It's complicated. They're not going to trust you. Well, there's a million chapters in this lecture series about how to be honest about what you see. And there's a bunch more chapters on how to recognize when someone is lashing out. But most importantly, there's a few chapters in this lecture about how to not care when somebody puts a label on you. That label only gets power if you acknowledge it. Things that do not get attention die. Hey, I called you an asshole. Yeah, I don't care. I'm real focused on this. So you said that we do this and this and this. I got it. Okay, what else is bothering you? Well, because you're obviously some sort of narcissistic Machiavellian, whatever, I just think it's wrong that you do. Okay, so you think that's wrong. Are you going to have the fight about the label? They're only calling you that label because you're their enemy. You're dehumanized, like you've dehumanized them. Why would you expect anything different? Unless, here's the test again, you are better than them. So if you run into that problem, you've still got some I'm better than you stuck in you. How much I am better than you depends on the person you're dealing with. because you do get to make that call. The question isn't, do you get to make that call or not? It is a tool. The question is, are you doing it right? Are you being wise with your decisions about who is better than you and worse than you? I am better than the guy that shot up that school. Period. My life has more value than his. Period. I wouldn't feel bad if he fell in a blender, if he didn't already get shot. Period. I say that. I own it. I dare you to disagree with me. You can try. You can say you wouldn't make that decision. You might try to make me look bad for believing it. And guess what? If you're trying to make me look bad for being honest about what I believe, I'm better than you too. Go fuck yourself. Put a label on me. You don't even know me. Try to reduce me to one dimension because that's as much as your brain can hold. And you're running from every feeling that makes you feel small, but you can't because everything that reflects back on you is small because you're small. And you're blaming everyone else for being too big, their ideas. Fuck you. I'm better than you. Now what? Well, now you're my enemy. I better be better than you then. Otherwise, you could hurt me. That's the way it is. So this isn't to say that tool of judgment disappears, because there is no forgiveness without judgment. There are no enemies without judgment. If you don't have judgment, you don't have enemies. You just have people who bother you less than others. None of them are your enemy because you wouldn't judge them that way. So every one of these points where you meet resistance, you need to ask yourself, why am I meeting resistance? Is this person listening to me yet? Does this person care at all about making peace? If the answer is no, then don't bother. Some people are just going to hate you for no reason. You got a stupid face. I don't know if your face is really stupid, but that's a reason people have for hating someone. It's that easy. I don't like his face. All right, so you got a stupid face, I guess. He's your enemy. It's a stupid reason to make an enemy, but I guess if you don't tell anybody. So you get to the point where you got to make a decision about a person. So is this person worth forgiving? What does that even mean? Forgiveness and being an enemy are different things. You can be someone's enemy and have completely forgiven them. Mostly because it only takes one person to be an enemy. You're just an enemy who won't fight back at that point. You don't get to decide that on your own. Oh, I don't have any enemies. Sure you do. You don't treat anyone like they're your enemy. Fair enough. That's a good strategy most of the time. Even if you're not doing it for the right reasons, that strategy will pay off way more than a lot of others. Do not treat people like you're their enemy as a default. You will have less enemies. But that doesn't mean that someone can't treat you like an enemy. You're harmless. What are you going to do? You don't treat anyone like they're your enemy. Pushover. Hope you're wise with the people you keep around you at that point, because you're not going to defend yourself. That's your own choice. If you fall into the group of people that don't have any enemies, that, or you're incredibly diplomatic, good for you. You don't need this chapter if you're already pulling that off. I wish everybody didn't need this chapter. Hope is that some of you don't. That's great. Get out there. What you have is not common. Let's spread it around, please. Do your part. It's like having O negative blood. You can't hoard that shit. For the rest of us, we need a transfusion stack. So if you know how to turn enemies into friends, you got to be doing that shit night and day. Because every time you show somebody how to do it, they only have to learn that once. You only have to learn how to do this once to know how it works. All right, so you get past all the hard stuff, which is the hardest part, by the way. Every step is less difficult than the one before it when it comes to turning enemies into friends. That's because, guess what? You're talking about a sliding scale, not an either or. Every time you kick that needle a little bit, it goes less enemy, more friend. And whether the person knows that's happening or not, it is. Because eventually you reach a point where both of you go, okay, maybe it's not so bad. If it works. If it doesn't work, well, you didn't really lose anything except some time. But so you finally get to the point where you've agreed to acknowledge each other's existence. It's a more important step than it sounds. It's almost silly that I need to say that this is a required step. For someone to not be your enemy, you need to acknowledge their existence as a human being, and they need to acknowledge your existence as a human being, which means both of you have to give up whatever you call them, or at least agree to put that aside for the moment. Because sometimes if something is put to the side, it doesn't get picked up again. Doesn't mean you have to keep it down there. It's a brain tool. Unless your imagination frizzes out, you're not going to lose hatred because you decide to ignore it for a minute. You can make as much hatred as you want. Don't worry about dropping it for a second. The only reason that you should worry about giving up hatred is if it is currently masking your self-disgust. So everybody else who is not masking their self-disgust, don't worry about giving up your hatred or not. That's not a thing. The only people who should worry about giving up their hatred are people who are masking self-disgust at what they would see if they saw themselves treating a human being the way they were treating a human being instead of some animal that they've decided doesn't matter. Put your own mom or your dad or your brother, someone you care about, put them in the same situation that you just reacted to. How did you treat them? If that would make you feel embarrassed, you have no right being angry for how a person acts when you act that way to them. You're stupid if you think it's going to happen a different way, because you already behave that way when it happens to you. So turning enemies into friends is recognizing what you both have in common, which means all of you, every single one of you, enemy and friend dynamics. You have each other in common. You do not exist in that dynamic without the other person, which means you are linked. So everything that is true for human beings is true for both of you. And if words coming from your mouth would embarrass you if you spoke them to someone you loved, the way to test them is to get rid of your anger. See if you can. If you can't, the only thing anger hides like that, where it does not want to go away, is self-disgust. Anger fades for everything else. Because anger goes away when you're not confronted with the thing that makes you angry. If your own feelings are the problem, the anger will stay with you. Because everything is carried inside you. You put it there, you keep it alive. Things you don't pay attention to die. So as long as that anger is there, you are keeping it alive. Only reason to do that is because it's covering up something worse. Something you can't blame on someone else, maybe. That was my journey. I was far too willing to be hard on people. So that's the process, right? Recognizing that you're both people, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Find out things you have in common. The more goals you have in common, the better. You want to make an enemy into a friend, you got to set a limit on that. How much of a friend do you want them to be? Do you want them to just stop fucking with you? There's a minimum for that. Do you really wish that you guys could get a little bit more friendly because it would be good for the family? All right, there's a different limit for that. Do you love this person? And does it hurt you that they don't love you back because they hate themselves and you? How much do you want that person to be your friend? That's all different decisions, which is why I can't teach one lecture on that. How vulnerable and honest with yourself you can be, plus how sincere the other person believes you are, equals how much you can shift the needle from enemy to friend. It's as simple as that, as far as the limit goes. Your competence, that will be determined by how much of your own shadow you can recognize in someone else. If they say something to you that is born of a discussed sensitivity to their own vulnerability, and you have that too, neither one of you knows how to handle it, you're going to fight about it. If one of you has tackled that demon and the other one has not, they can see it happening in real time and say, I'm not bothered by that anymore because I understand where it comes from. I produce my self-worth. You don't give it to me or take it away. I'm talking to you right now because I choose to, for reasons that are my own. And one of those reasons is, I think it sucks that we're fighting and I want to fix it. And I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. So would you mind cutting out the personal attacks, because I'm calling a ceasefire. Set limits, reasonable limits, limits you agree to follow as well. Make a promise and keep it. You got to start small when it comes to build. If you don't have any trust, that's how you build it. Tell them you will do a thing in the next sentence and then do it. A token of recognition that they are a human being. It doesn't have to be flattering. It doesn't have to be an attack. It can just be a desire that you have, that they are a part of. I want us to not fight. I want us to not fight when it hurts blank. I don't care about you, but I do care about all of the people you care about. Say it's a family member. This family is bigger than our problem. Are you bigger than our problem too? Do you care? Do you care about the rest of us, even though you don't care about me? That's how you make inroads. You agree to do things together, which is you agree to agree on things. That's the process. There's a million ways to do that. And there's a million tools in this lecture series to cover pretty much everything. If there is a way to fight with words and ideas that has not been covered in this lecture series, I want to know. Because I believe that every tool to cover every situation that I've encountered in my life exists in this framework here, or a combination of its constituent parts. It's because it's not a how-to book. It's just a map of the brain. That's why. I'm not trying to do anything specific. I just want to understand how it all fits together. It's the proverbial wish for wisdom that King Solomon gave God. You know, I don't want a specific goal. I just want to know what's right. Stick to that. That's gonna get you far in these types of matters. So, all right, then what? 4 p.m. bathroom break. All right, yeah. So you get to the point where you agree that you each exist. Well, that's not bad. Pretty much from there, you kind of done it. There's a ceasefire. You know, you can negotiate for things at that point. But let's talk about the one thing that everybody's probably wondering, and the thing that I spend the most time on. Spend the most time on it because it is the most important decision. It is not a decision that can be made quickly if your goal is to get it right. Who's worth it? What do you need to see before you will trust? There's a lot of different answers to that question. I don't know that they're all good or bad. Just the same way that a lot of ideas aren't really good or bad. It's when are they good ideas? When are they bad ideas? You know, what's the right idea at the time? Sometimes you can't plan that ahead of time, and you have to just be in the moment and say, this is everything I understand to be true. If I understand things that I think are true enough, this is my right call. You know what to do because you did your homework ahead of time and you learned the lesson. So you're ready for the test. It's a test. It's an unexpected thing. So how do I decide? That's all I can really share with you. Where do I draw the line? If you press, if you ask the right questions, and if you're fair and you don't change your definitions, you don't care where the conversation goes, but you're very focused on where it doesn't go. Where I draw the line is when somebody admits by repeated action or by their own admission, they don't care about being honest with themselves or anyone else. I don't care about that. You don't. Where are you going? I'm leaving. Why are you leaving? You don't care. Why do you care now? You only care if I care about what you think is right. I don't need that. Or you. You're not being honest with me. I'm not asking you to change. But I'm also not associating with you by my own choice. I judged you to be dishonest. Your words have no value. And I'm going to act like that. That's a harsh thing to do. It means it is not a thing quickly done. Far more often, people jump to that conclusion. Oh, this person just doesn't want to listen. They're not being reasonable. Yeah, maybe it's all them every time. Oh, and how long did it take you to figure that out? All of 2 sentences. Wow. Well, you did twice as much as most people do. Not nearly enough to get it right. Strictly from a geometrical standpoint, 5 measurements, 5 perspectives make a 3-dimensional idea that is stable. We've covered a whole lecture on how to make 0-dimensional ideas, 1-dimensional, and 2-dimensional ideas, and what the limitations are of losing each dimension of perspective and how earth-shatteringly different it makes the problem and the solution appear. So if you've taken one measurement, or you've taken the same measurement twice, you have a one-dimensional idea. You're probably wrong. If you won't check, that's a good test for whether you're probably right or wrong. If it's not the right test of whether you're right or wrong, because a broken watch is right twice a day, it is the test of your honesty. Remember that. When somebody doesn't talk about something, nature abhors a vacuum. And in the perspective of other people who are not you, who do believe they matter as much as you, if not more, they will fill in that gap. Whatever demons and dragons and unknown assumptions of what could you possibly be hiding that you wouldn't share with me a thing that is simply at. So there's a test for that. Does the person not want to share, or do they not understand what you're asking? Those are two very different things. Take measurements. Learn how to ask for the same thing more than one way. Often, a request is not answered because the language is not understood. The idea was for it. The setup was bad. It was relying on knowledge you had and the other person did not. It's easy to fix. Be comfortable repeating yourself different ways. That shows you are a reasonable creature who's not thick-headed. So it's very easy. Do you not understand, or do you disagree? Figure that out first. Most of the time, it's a lack of understanding. And if you follow the rest of these lectures, a lack of understanding can be corrected if one of the two people knows how. Because the person who understands has a higher dimension of perspective, which means they know where the disconnect is and they can fill it in. And then they create a person who is like them, who knows how to bridge the gap as well. So this is the building process of turning enemies into friends. You need to give them value. If they're going to be your friend, you punish your enemies. You give things to your friends. I don't care what it is. It's something. You give them love. You give them help. You give them a sympathetic ear. I don't know, but you don't give them a hard time, and that's it. That's what you do with enemies. If the friends you have are measured by how little you are willing to do to hurt them, you do not have friends. You have enemies that you could destroy, which means you only hang around people who are weaker than you. Think about that. Now, if you only hang around people that are weaker than you and you have everything you could ever want, that means that the rest of humanity probably is weaker than you. If you only have a shitty life and your house is dirty and you're behind on your payments and nobody likes you and you get in fights all the time, you're drunk or smoking all the time, and you only have enemies like that, then you just hang around people that are weaker than you and you're weak too. Everyone else who's not that person, I'm not talking to you. You might not be the one who needed to hear that. I'm covering everybody here, all the extremes. Everyone who's not an extreme, well, just take less of my advice. There's a chapter on how to do that. You only need the extremes to find the rest if you learn nothing else from this entire damn series. Forget every word that I've said. You need the extremes to figure out what's in the middle and nothing else. That's Taoism. It's enlightenment for beginners. It is how not to be an asshole who only sees things one way for dummies. All right. If you learn nothing else, that will change your life on its own. Please, love of God, don't waste 100 hours of your life listening to these and not learn that concept. Unless it's a joke. Like that would be, I could see that kind of dedication to a bit. But I'd want to know what the joke is. Love a good joke. Like, why would you do that? Like, are you just doing it to fuck with me at that point? Like, it's not hard. Because I'm assuming this hypothetical person I'm inventing has done what I've said they've hypothetically done. Why would they put that much time and resist this part of it? It's part of everything. Everything else falls apart if this isn't true. Spent 90 minutes proving it mathematically. If you don't learn this, there's no hope for you. Unless you're the world's greatest comedian, and then I want to meet you, shake your hand, maybe let you hit me with a pie or something. I don't know. We'll have to play that by ear. I just know that if you can turn this into a joke after this long, I don't want to be your enemy. Because you can fuck with me in ways I don't understand. So, well, now what? So you got some things to try. Who are you going to try it on? For me, it's the person who is willing to correct themselves when they realize they are wrong. Which is, by the way, 1/2 of my trust algorithm. You want to know if you can trust them. We're going to review that one because it's short and it's powerful. You want to know if you can trust somebody enough to give them a small responsibility that probably won't fuck you. If they're worth a test, here's the test to decide if they're worth a test. Too many people fail that test if you don't know how to do it procedurally. Watch that person when they're right and how they treat the person that they are right over. Watch that person, how they act when they are wrong. Somebody else tells them they are wrong. If that person is kind in both of those instances, you can trust them. If that person gets upset in either one of those instances, you can trust that person to be themselves. Which means you cannot trust them unless they agree with you. Which means I is greater than you, fixed in their hearts. That person is not worth it to me. Not if they really care about enforcing that. Not if they're violently inclined to enforce that. They would rather destroy my life than let me think differently. That person is my enemy. That person is the enemy of mankind. That person is their own worst enemy. And I'll say one of the most controversial things I've ever said. For every person that irredeemably believes other people need to be forced to agree with you because you're right, and they don't matter if they don't agree with you, you kill yourself. Do the world a favor. Because if every person who believed that took my advice overnight, you see what the world is the next day. Now, why? Oh man, Tom, wow. Well, my mom committed suicide and she did the world a favor. So if you're going to get on your moral high horse, you have to admit that there are people who kill themselves, that the world is not a better place for them being gone. Nobody's crying over that kid who got killed after shooting up the school. They just waited for him to hurt other people first. Suffering comes from somewhere. So why do I say they should do it? Well, it's not right for me to do it. I don't know. I don't know who those people are. I can't know. You really can't. Not to that level of certainty. But they know. So then what? Well, the reason I say that so harshly is because those people are already killing themselves inside. They don't understand where responsibility comes from. They don't understand where respect comes from. They don't understand where validation comes from. They think other people make that and give it to you. They don't understand that it is produced internally. And without it, you die. They understand that. Everybody understands that because it's not optional. Things that you do not love die. If you do not love yourself, you die. If you are in pain and you cry out and people try to love you a little bit, that'll keep you going until they stop because they get tired of the crying. So why do I say that? Because they take everybody with them and they still die inside. I is greater than you to the very end. So that's all I got to say about that. If I'm wrong, then maybe I'm wrong about my mom. Good luck finding one person to agree with you on that, because my family, that person doesn't exist. Her side of the family didn't even pay for the funeral. They stiffed the director. They did not pay for my mom's funeral. No, she was her kid. I wasn't going to pay for it. I didn't want to go. My sister wanted me to go, so I did. For that, I'm glad I went. But I didn't mourn her passing. Now, there's a difference. Let's talk about the difference between enemies and forgiveness. My mom was my enemy. She was everybody's enemy. Nobody got a choice in that. She made that decision for everybody. We all had to live with it. So I hated her. Why not? She hated me. She hated herself. Why shouldn't I get to hate her too? No, the problem is she'd been dead for 10 years. And I still hated her. What was I doing? She was in the ground. No, she wasn't even in the ground. They burned her up. I don't even know what happened to her ashes. I think if you don't pay, you don't get the ashes. Probably sitting on a shelf somewhere. Nobody wants to pony up the bucks to get her. But what? Well, the things I didn't like about her, I didn't like about anybody. And that's a problem. Because she was a human being. She was a human being whose choices led to suffering around her. But that wasn't all she was. She was enough of that was the only part you could know if you got close to her. But she had many other things about her that were also true of other people that had nothing to do with her choices. Tone of voice, certain hobbies, TV shows, certain kinds of food, actors, movie stars, places to visit, activities at home. None of those things had anything to do with her choices to be who she was. All that shit got tainted because I couldn't separate my rejection of her choices from the things that were present around those choices. Which meant I wasn't viewing everything fairly. She was dead. I couldn't blame her for keeping that alive. So what did I do? Well, I got to a point where I was sick of it. I was sick of being so angry about something I couldn't change. And I couldn't lie to myself about it because my own brain ratted me out. I got to know what's right. I can't leave it alone. I got to know why. Well, if you're burying trauma hard enough, but you care about the truth hard enough too, eventually you're going to get to the point where you realize your choice to keep that trauma alive. Why? To defend the thing that hurts you. Now, there's a name for that, Stockholm Syndrome. And people give themselves Stockholm Syndrome when they believe I is greater than you. They have to. Otherwise, they don't get to be greater than you. They have to love their captor. They are their captor. But it's an abusive love. It's a love that sees no wrong, regardless of how wrong it is. So, what did I have to do? Well, there might be another way out, but my choice was to forgive the person. She had stuff that was wrong with her brain. She made bad choices, a lot of them. I would never associate with her as a human being. I would not recommend her trying to think of something trivial. I would not recommend her on an application to rent a bike. How little faith I put in that woman. However, the venom needed to go. The hatred needed to go. Because I loved hating that woman. Because I wanted to love her instead and couldn't. I loved hating that woman because she loved hating me. That was her gift. And I kept it. And as long as I kept the gift of being allowed to hate her alive, I got to keep the gift of not having to look at myself and what it meant to do that. So it was a trade. The hard part was I had to realize I was being an asshole about a lot of things. And I was blaming people for things that weren't their fault. And I was holding people to standards that weren't reasonable. And that I was making assumptions about things that had nothing to do with them. That's what I had to give up. What I got was peace. So you ask yourself, is the goal to be right? Or is the goal to have lasting peace? Which is more right? Which is more ethical to want? If I is greater than you, being right will be more important. Peace on the inside is the only thing that gives you a clear look at the world. So that's how you get a clear look at your enemy. When you see them during peace, you can see who they are. More of them. Maybe more enough that you realize you're just two people trying to do the right thing who are having fights that have nothing to do with the other person. How could they with 3 interactions? That person is just a cardboard cutout from some baggage you haven't dealt with yet, unless they are really going out of their way to make it stick. So to finish up the lecture then, how to turn your enemies into friends. My personal recommendation is, let me start before my recommendation. My assessment is, judgment of another human being is not optional. If you were to use this tool, ignore that advice and ignore the rest because one depends on the other. The judgment that should be used is if a person is being honest with themselves and you, and we've covered how to find that. And are you being honest with yourself and holding yourself to the same standard? If all of those things are true of both of you, find what you have in common. Specifically goals, specifically things you both think are important. and keep adding to that list until that list is big enough that you can ask for things to be taken off the bad list. Things a friend would do. Hey, can you accept my apology for this? I don't think I handled myself well. I shouldn't have called you that name or said you believe this thing when you didn't say it first. You know, that's the thing I should ask you. I shouldn't tell you that. Sorry. Can you forgive me? And then from there, how much do you want to move the needle? That's up to you. None of it works if you don't do it for yourself. So if you fail at turning enemies into friends, your problem is I greater than you. So figure out how that's true and fix it. You won't have very many enemies to worry about. The only people who are really going to hate you at that point are the people who have already given up on themselves. And they were going to do that anyways. You just showed them everything they hate about themselves because your choices are so different. You can't exist in their world. It's got nothing to do with you. You shouldn't feel bad about it. That's all I got.
All right, one more left. Turning enemies into friends definitely reminds me of a bunch of Machiavellian type stuff.
Oh yeah, especially the survival aspect at the start. I felt like this lecture, and I still believe this was the right way to frame it, the right way I understand it, but this one felt very much reminiscent of a good old-fashioned law and gospel sermon. You could take that speech and mix in some Bible verses, and you would have a very classic Reverend fire and brimstone, love and forgiveness, personal judgment type sermon. At least for the types of churches I went to, we were a law and gospel church. You know, we believed in if you do these things and you don't care, that's bad. You know, there was a judgment there that was made on choices as well. And the ultimate choice was, well, God needs to be the one to say, are you willing to stop hitting yourself spiritually and take the forgiveness? Because if you don't, that's the only thing that's going to break the cycle. And you're just going to keep putting that shit out into the world. That's the benefit of forgiveness at church. If you need somebody else to tell you you're forgiven, for you to believe it, you will act that way if you believe it. And the production of that effect will produce a watered down version of what I've just described. So for everyone who says religion doesn't do anything for the person who doesn't follow its advice, which is love thy neighbor. And I add to that, with the same love you would give to yourself and your family, without a double standard. If you follow that, even if you don't know why, your life's going to be better than someone who doesn't. At least more people will care about you.
Yep, and that folds really nicely into Pay Ogre.
Yes, sir. I love Pay Ogre. I believe it. I told somebody on the phone today, people are our greatest asset. I gave you no credit.
Yeah, you did.
To be fair, well, I didn't reference you by name.
There we go. You know that's not how energy works. Energy doesn't work in names.
I gave you homage. I didn't give you credit. I
posted on Facebook yesterday, when any of my friends twerk, I feel like I'm with them in spirit, in their butts. So
I had the spiritual impaler.
Exactly. So you know how energy works. I take your energy as given. Even though you tried to be petty with it. Like, I'm okay with that. I mean, that happens, that's a lot. Like, as long as I get my shiny golden, turd nugget, I'm fine. Even if it's in the turd. You can give me a diamond in a turd, I'll take it every time.
Yeah, right. You just get a hose and one of those little beach things.
All right, I've got 5 kids here to deal with and see what's going on. They've been quiet for too long now. I'm
All
worried.
right, next, coming up Thursday, last lecture, healing others. This is different than turning enemies into friends, and it'll be the last one in the series, the most important, from my perspective. I can't wait to have you there.
Tonight's men's group is celibacy.
Okay, I think I'll celebrate that by making love with my wife.
Sounds good. I'll see you in the dojo.